it's very rewarding, because when people say to you, thank you for making me laugh for 40 years, it's a real compliment, you know? So my ego gets stroked twice every minute. So, Chris, go ahead.
All right, well, we have a bunch of people that want to ask some questions, but I have to ask this first question, because I want to know if this is true. Is that true that you were the first person ever to drop the F-bomb at a memorial service?
I think so. I was certainly the first person ever to say shit on British television. I'm very proud of it. I didn't actually say it live. They were showing a clip of a movie I'd made with Peter Sellers called Magic Christian. We made it in 1967, and they used a clip in which I said shit. Miriam Margolis, whoever she may be, she claims she said fuck first on television, I don't know. But I think it was the first time at a memorial service, and I wanted to do something that Graham Chapman would appreciate, because he hated what he called mindless good taste. And so I did say fuck, but I have to say that every other person who stood up to pay tribute to Graham on that occasion, and they all said fuck. So there were about 13 people saying fuck on the first occasion it ever happened.
All right, first question.
Hello. I want to know, how cool is it to have a species of lemur named after you?
Well, what was that?
How cool is it to have a species of lemur named after you?
Oh, it was the coolest thing. It was lovely. A Swiss guy, and I've temporarily forgotten his name. He's in Zurich. He was a zoologist, and he said, I've discovered this new species of lemur. It's just been recognized. There's not a lot of them, and they're down on the side of a lake. May we call it after you? And I said, do you mean you want to call them all John? And he said, no, we want to call the species. So this special species is called Cleese's woolly lemur, and its Latin name, its proper Latin name is Avahi Cleesii. I've never been to see them, but I really want to go. I did do a program about a release of captive bred lemurs into the forest. They're only in Madagascar, these lovely little creatures, because although they're adorable, they are very stupid. They didn't last long in Africa because they'd walk up to leopards and say, what are you having for breakfast? So they exist only in Madagascar, where there's only one predator, which is an enormous mongoose. But there aren't, I can't remember what they're called, but anyway, the enormous mongooses are not there in great numbers. So there's over 30 species of lemur, and they are delightful, and they are in some way completely like human beings, because the women are in charge. It's a matriarchy, and the lemurs just simply do what the lady lemurs tell them what to do, and it's a very peaceful society. And when they do have a squabble, when one lot has a squabble with another, they stand some distance apart, and they have little glands at the foot of their tail that can produce a very nasty smell. And they produce that smell, and then they turn their backs and waft their tails and blow the nasty smell in the other direction. Well, the same thing is going on in reverse on the other side. Now that's the way to have a war.
Perfect. Next question.
Hello. Oh, hi.
Hello. So you've been a part of so many franchises like Harry Potter, Shrek, and even Bond after replacing Desmond as Q. Has there ever been a franchise that you've ever wanted to participate in?
Oh, what an interesting question. What an interesting question. Yes, I think there would be. I mean, I remember I used to watch a television show, a police show, that was shot in San Francisco many years ago, and I always wanted to be in that. And I've just been approached by a cruise company to see if I'll be some kind of ambassador for them. And I adore cruises. I know you all laugh at old people in cruises, but they're absolutely lovely. You just sit. It's much better to go on a river cruise, not a sea cruise, because you just sit there and they push the scenery past you. And you get about 5 meals a day. So, yes, there are things that I would not advertise, and I have sometimes turned down things, but I would certainly sponsor or advertise good things. See nothing wrong with it.
Excellent.
I'll tell you one, for example, Harry's Razors. Have you tried Harry's Razors? They're very, very good.
Excellent. Next question.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Cleese. Again, thanks for coming. My question would be, do you remember where the inspiration came for Mr. Creosote, and how long did it actually take to get through that sequence when you were doing?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I can only partially answer it because I didn't write it, but I can tell you the history of it, which is quite surprising. The way that we worked on Python was basically that every week or so we would get together and read out to each other what we had written in the previous week. And it was quite simple. If we all thought it was funny and we laughed, it was in the next show. And if we didn't, it wasn't. And some of the times we'd laugh at the first bit or the middle or the end and not the rest of it. And then we'd say, well, let's just keep the funny bit. And in Python you could do that because you could go from sketch to sketch in a ridiculous way. So it was very much to do with the way that it went down. It was not an intellectual process, it was did people laugh? And the happiest moment I ever had is when I read out the cheese shop sketch. And Michael Palin laughed so much he fell off his chair. I wonder if he was lying on the ground, emitting these small animal noises. Absolutely wonderful. And on the occasion that they first read out Mr. Creosote, people didn't think it was funny. Isn't that extraordinary? And Terry Jones, who wrote it, sort of was very surprised. Nobody laughed, so we just put it in the pile that said, not today, thank you. And then a couple of days later we had another meeting and Terry said, he used his Welsh. I felt very, very strongly about everything. And he told me, I really think he's very, very funny. So we said, all right. We said, read it again. And he said, all right. And then Michael read it. And we all thought it was pretty funny, not hilarious, but I, being a crafty old bastard, I realized that the head waiter's role was a wonderful one if it was written right. So Graham and I said, well, can we take it away and rejig it a bit? Because Jonesy was wonderful on ideas, but he wasn't so great on dialogue. We're all good at some things and bad at others. He wasn't good on dialogue. Whereas Chapman and I were very good on dialogue. Jonesy was wonderful on very surprising visual ideas. You know, Michael Palin was the best at producing extraordinary new comedy characters. Eric was very good musically, which we didn't do so much over the first few years. He was also the best impersonator. And Terry Jones, Terry Gilliam, I can't remember what he could do. Well, we used to make very expensive pictures which flopped. That's right. So the whole point was, Chapman and I took the sketch away and rewrote it. And when we read it out next time, everyone fell over. But it just shows that sometimes you have to mess around a bit and go backwards and forwards and just let it happen. It's not at this extraordinary moment of inspiration. You do have moments of inspiration, but then you have an awful lot of what I call carpentry to actually make the stuff work. Okay? It is a
Hello, good morning. So the question that I have for you is, I know that it was probably a pain to film a lot of Monty Python from what I've seen. So I was wondering, what was the hardest scene to film in like the Holy Grail?
The Holy Grail was the Tim the Enchanter. Because when they first came across Tim, he was standing in this very impressive place. And I'm not kidding you. I had to stand on a space that's rather about half the size of one of these. And if I fell that way, I was dead. If I fell that way, I was fairly severely injured. And if I fell there, I could probably continue to live, but I'd be in a wheelchair. I mean, and I was wearing a cloak, Tim's cloak, which weighed about 70 pounds, and it was a windy day. And I'm not kidding you, I was scared as hell. And I remember we did the first take, and a guy called John Horton, a special effects guy, got it all to work. All those explosions all worked. And then Terry Jones decided we had to shoot it again. And to set all the explosions up took about 40 minutes. So I was standing there on this little area with four really sharp stones all the way down, because I was in the highest possible spot. And I remember I had to stand there for another 40 minutes in the wind, trying not to be killed before we did another take. And I remember Terry Jones saying to me, "Oh, John, are you all right?" And I said, "No." "What are you going to do about it?" Silence. So that was the scariest thing I ever did, and it really was scary.
Thank you.
Now, was his name, I've heard rumors that the name wasn't Tim, that you just improvised that. Is that
yes, this is one of those completely baseless lies that gets out there. And then people think they've got a little bit of sort of conspiracy theory. No, the whole point of taking that huge pause before I said Tim is that Tim is such a weedy name. Can you imagine a dictator? Do you see what I mean? A dictator in the Balkans, and everyone say, "Oh, we're terrified of Tim." Just doesn't work. It's the first three letters of timid. You know, and it's a wimpy name. And so to build this guy up and put these sheep's horns on him, and then to have him say my name, so there are some who call me Tim. So whoever said I'd forgotten the name or improvised it is talking with their head up their ass.
Next question.
Yes, sir.
Hello. What would you say is the most proud accomplishment in your filmmaking career? And would you say it's 2001's Rat Race?
Why is it Rat Race?
Should be. I love Rat Race. I think my most proud, the moment that I'm most proud of is when I was stabbed to death by Robert De Niro. Are you aware of this? Frankenstein? I played Professor Waldman in Frankenstein, and I was the guy who was administering inoculations in Austria at the time of, you know, the film, when the film took place, and De Niro refused to be inoculated, probably a Trump supporter. As a result, we were going to forcibly inoculate him, and instead, because I was in charge, he stabbed me to death. And it's lovely to be able to say to people that I've been stabbed to death by Robert De Niro, because no one else is going to say, "Oh, that happened to me too." So I think that was my greatest moment. Hello.
I was wondering, when you were a child or in your formative years, what or who inspired you?
When you were a child, who inspired you?
Nobody. No, I had soft toys, and I played a lot with all my soft toys. I can now remember them very, very clearly. Because you see, I was an only child. Well, there were other children, but I had them all killed when I was I was an only child, and you know, you've got to be quite good at amusing yourself. You're probably too young, some of you, to have heard of Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis once said he thought the greatest force for creativity was boredom. Because when you got bored, you started to play. And play is absolutely indistinguishable from creativity. I've actually got a very good little book out, if anyone's interested. I wrote it about 2 years ago, and it's called Creativity, which is not a very creative title. Each people can remember it. And it's about what you do in order to become creative. And my feeling is that there are some people, not that there are some people born with it, but that there are some people, the circumstances that they grow up in make them more creative. But you can reproduce those circumstances if you know how to do it. And I did a TV program, I did a series of interview programs that are out there on YouTube. They were called the Dinosaur Hour because I only had very old white males and females, very old people, were the only ones allowed on the program because they knew things, you know. That's the main difference, you know, young people is the old ones know things. You know? Not all of them. I mean, you need to realize there are people in this country who will buy a pre-owned car who would never buy a second-hand car. But anyway, it's called the Dinosaur, and if you look at it on YouTube, there's some very good stuff, but one of the most interesting things that came out of it was that the people who grew up in creative households were creative from the beginning. And the ones that did not grow up in creative households got there in the end. And we had Tim Rice, you know, wrote all the lyrics. He grew up in a creative household. And I grew up in one that wasn't creative. And I was quite good at logical stuff like maths and Latin. Maths, so I could do a bit. And I got into Cambridge, and it was only at Cambridge when I joined a club like the Hasty Pudding at Harvard. I joined a club called the Footlights, and I discovered that I could take a sheet of blank paper and write things on it, which, if performed a few days later, would make everyone laugh. And it was a complete surprise to me, because no one had ever told me that I was the slightest bit creative. I'll tell you a story. This is how you get creativity drummed out of you while you're at school. An English class are formed to write an essay on time. And time is almost impossible to put into words. We all know what it is, but you try to define it, you go crazy. So I wrote a whole essay on time on the fact that I hadn't had time to write the essay. Which is quite clever for a 15-year-old, you know? But the English teacher said, please, this isn't a proper essay. End of subject. You see what I mean? So it's not as though you get slapped around for being creative, you just don't get encouraged by teachers. So if you read this little book, you find out how I discovered that I was thinking about things, problems that I had to solve when I was asleep. And if you told young people that, they won't believe you. But my parents' generation would always say, I'll sleep on that, because they sort of knew that it would clarify in the morning. And the whole idea of creativity is that you have a more unconscious part of the mind that will do all the work for you if you know how to treat it. But the unconscious is not an obedient thing. You can't hit it with a stick or tell it what to do. You've got to coax it out of you. Like, you know the tip of the tongue phenomenon when you can't remember a name? And the more you pursue the name, it just kind of vanishes. And then 5 minutes later, oh yeah. I had that this morning. I was trying to think of the people who live in Belgium who speak French. They're called walloons, and I could not think of the name. And then all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, oh, walloons. But why did it come up? I said, because it came up when the unconscious was happy to let it up. And once you begin to realize it's about establishing a cooperation with your unconscious, then you can become creative. And that doesn't mean artistically creative. It means you can have ideas about how to do anything better.
You have your law degree.
Oh yes, I got into Cambridge on science, and then I discovered, I had to wait for 2 years because we just abolished conscription, you know, compulsory service in the armed forces, which they used to be for a long time after the war. When you finished school, you had to go off and be in the Army, Navy, or Air Force for 2 years. They just got rid of that, so that there was a bottleneck of people getting into Cambridge. And I got in on science, but I suddenly began to realize that when I went to Cambridge, the other students who were going to study science were actually interested in it. And I thought this gave them an unfair advantage. So I said, what can you do? And they said, well, not much, because you don't have any, what we call A-levels, you don't have the proper. I said, what can I do? And they said, you can study economics. And I said, or I could kill myself. And then they said, well, you could do archaeology and anthropology. And a fellow from a little town like me in Western-super-Mare isn't going to waste a university education on something like that, because you've got to get a job. And they said you could be a lawyer. And so I became a lawyer. And then in my last year, I was in a Footlights review, which is when I discovered I was creative, and I escaped, which is good, because lawyers always commit suicide when they're 50. Well, there's nothing else to do, really. Hi.
Hi there, good afternoon, Mr. Cleese. It's an honor to get to meet you. And
it is. It's brought meaning
oh, indeed.
to otherwise a rather pointless life.
Just wanted to say thank you, sincerely, for making me laugh for 40 years, even though I'm only 27. My question for you is, it's been my observation that in Western countries, in the UK, United States, that there's this push in comedy to punch up, meaning that the butt of the joke will only go to people who are in positions of power, and everyone else just needs to be left alone. Now, I was curious, with your decades of wisdom in this industry, what are your thoughts on that philosophy, that trajectory of comedy, if you will, and whether you believe it's more important to punch up versus become an equal opportunity offender?
I think it's more interesting that comedy should make people laugh. You know? So the question of punching up or punching down is political rather than anything to do with the essence of comedy. What we laugh at in comedy is not perfect people. You see, when we realized this when Monty Python started writing Life of Brian, you can't really say anything funny about Christ because he always behaved appropriately. Do you see what I mean? And what is funny about people is inappropriate behavior. In a sense, you can only, humor is always critical because he's always pointing out you're falling short of perfect behavior. You see what I mean? So all comedy is critical. The question is, if you make jokes about people, is it done with affection or is it done with nastiness? And if it's done with nastiness, it's awful, because it's not funny anyway. It's just to hurt people's feelings, so we don't do that, or at least we shouldn't, it's wrong. But with making ordinary affectionate jokes, it's fine to criticize people. Like I say, why do the French have so many civil wars? And the answer is it's so that they can win one now and again. And that's critical. You see, it's quite affectionate. It's like the Italians. You see, why do the Italian men grow moustaches? The answer is because they want to look like their mothers. doesn't mean we don't like the Italians. We're just teasing them. There's affection there. I shall eat Italian food tonight. But the waiters are Italian because they're the best waiters in the world. But you can tell an awful lot of teasing and what we call joshing. Do you have that word? Yes. Yes, joshing. You go in any sports changing room, everyone's teasing everyone. But because it's done with affection, it's actually a bonding mechanism. Now, the question of punching up or down is, I think it is much, much better when you're writing something to punch up. I think it's much better to make fun of powerful people than of weak people. Not only because it's nicer to attack and fairer and more interesting, but also punching down on little people isn't in fact going to accomplish anything, whereas pointing out the faults of the powerful might. But at the same time, if somebody comes up to me and is rude, I'm not going to say, oh, thank you very much for humiliating me. If somebody's rude to me, I can see no reason why I shouldn't be rude to them. Do you see what I mean? I mean, somebody wrote the other day, I told us to put things out on Twitter, and they said, you haven't been funny for 50 years, which is a bit aggressive. Well, it wouldn't be if I was a lawyer, but you know. And I said, how will you know? So I think if somebody punches up, I punch down, but not very hard, because what I'm trying to do is to make a point about a mistaken way of thinking, rather than dealing with the person themselves. And you sometimes have to do that when you get in arguments with people. You have to explain why their argument isn't good, and sometimes it's best done with humor. But by and large, I've always punched up in the things that I've written. And there's a very good, Jamie Lee Curtis has a husband called Chris Guest, and he makes very good films, but he always makes films about little people and makes fun about little people. I don't think that that's as good as making fun about important people. Does that answer?
Yes, I believe so.
Eventually,
Thank you very much.
in the end.
Did they want you to become like a lord? Bestow the title?
Oh, they wanted, somebody suggested I should become, I helped a middle party in England. They were originally called the Social Democrats, and then they became the Liberal Democrats, and I did party political broadcasts for them. And at the end of the leader's reign as leader of the Liberal Democrats, Paddy Ashdown basically said, do you want to be in the House of Lords? And I said, well, I thought it would be very nice because it would annoy the pythons so much. They have to refer to me as Sir, my Lord. But then I discovered I had to be there in the winter. There's no point in committing yourself to being in London in the winter, so I passed on it. But I think when I was 18, I went to teach the school, and one of the guys teaching me was someone who taught me 5 years before, and his name was Bartlett, and he was the first intellectual I ever met. And when I came back to the school, I said to all the other teachers, tell me a poem I should learn. And he gave me Graham's Elegy to learn. And when I read the words, the paths of glory lead but to the grave, that always struck me as a pretty sound statement. It doesn't matter how important or rich you are, in the end, you're dead. All of us, you're all gonna die. And if you bear that in mind, it's quite good for deciding what matters and what doesn't. And that's why I just wish all the billionaires would die tomorrow.
Hi John, what are your memories of filming the opening pirate sequence of The Meaning of Life?
I wasn't in it. I wasn't in the Crimson Pirate.
No, the opening scene with the pirates in the building.
The what?
The office pirate.
I wasn't in that scene. I think I avoided it because Terry Gilliam was going to direct it. Yeah.
My bad. That's,
Yeah, but he did a very clever thing about the Crimson Pirate, which was supposed to last about 2 minutes, and in the end it lasted about 20 minutes. And Terry went $1 million over budget on that. But I did avoid actually being in it. But when I saw it, I thought it was very good. Much too long, like all of Terry's films. But and the extraordinary thing about Terry Gilliam is that he has the most wonderful daughter. It's astonishing.
The sketch, like if by an argument, and
oh yeah, yes, Chapman and I wrote that.
Did you write that?
Yeah.
That is one of the funniest things that's ever been aired on television.
It's very clever, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bugger to remember. Yes, I was very proud of that, and I did actually write some of the pirate movie because it starts with a big American corporation called the Very Big Corporation of America, which is a lovely name. And the chairman starts up by asking, my American accent is terrible, but he starts by, do you guys realize how little we own? You know, there are still things out there that we don't own. And I wrote a thing which they'd had a party, a group of people who'd been asked to find out the meaning of life. And they were reporting to that board. And the guys were reporting said, well, there are 2 reasons that we're having problems at the moment. First reason is that people are not wearing enough hats. The second reason is that the basic nature of human consciousness is that it is constantly being diverted from in unimportant things, trivial things, from important things, and that is why people cannot concentrate for any period of time on anything that's really important to them, because they will always be distracted by things that don't matter. And there's a pause and somebody says, what was that about hats? That's a really good joke. And Terry Gilliam fucked it up. Because he had the cameras going around like this while the dialogue was being done. And what people don't realize, and half the people in advertising don't realize this, is that if you have some arresting, interesting, surprising image up there on the screen, you don't hear what's being said in voiceover. You see how many commercials where the people are gabbling away, giving you lots and lots and lots and lots of information, at the same time they're giving you lots of images. And our eye will always go to movement. Because when we were out there, you know, in the savannah waiting to be eaten by lions, the only thing that was ever going to hurt us moved. Rocks were not going to come and get us. So our attention always goes to movement. Have you ever sat in a sports bar and tried not to watch the game? You know? Your attention goes to the game the whole time because of the movement. So Gilliam doesn't know that. He thinks that you can take information in while having your attention distracted by visuals. Hello.
Hello.
How long have you been there?
A minute or two.
Minute or two?
It's all right.
Nothing minute.
I'm enjoying listening to you. It's totally fine.
Good.
I wanted to know if there was anything particularly special that stuck with you from A Fish Called Wanda.
Well, I think it was to some extent about me, because you see, I came to America very early. The first year I was in America was 1964. And that's the year that Lyndon Johnson beat Barry Goldwater. I mean, this is a long time ago. And I was very English. I was not posh English, I was lower middle class English. My dad sold insurance out of a 10 horsepower car. It was nothing important. But they spent what little money they had on giving me a middle class education. And what I feel about it was that when I came to America, I immediately felt more relaxed. And what I realized was that nobody gave a fuck what I did. I was in New York for 18 months, and I had a very odd experience in New York, and this shows you the sense of freedom that I had. I got up one morning, I was in a small show on Broadway. I was getting $200 a week. The tax people took 30%, so that left me with 140. I was staying in a hotel on Lexington Avenue, which cost me $30 a week. For a week. That left me with $110 to live on, and with that $110 I lived like a prince. I had $14 a day to spend, and I felt very relaxed. And one morning I got up and I went for a walk, and I bought a newspaper, and the newspaper, I saw the front page, and it said the date was 27th of October whatever it was, 64, and I thought, oh, it's my birthday. I'd completely forgotten it was my birthday. And when I was with America, I found it very easy to make contact with people because they were so much less reserved than the English. And I would go so far as to say now that almost all my closest friends are Americans because they're not so reserved. Many of them, for example, would have done therapy. Not so much the Trump supporters, but the people that I know. And that means when people start looking at their own emotions more objectively, it's much easier to negotiate stuff with people who've done that sort of thing. And I began to realize that I liked Americans' enthusiasm, and I used to like very much the positive thinking. But I also noticed they sometimes overdid that a bit. Well, if you watched in those days, if you watched television commercials, there'd always be people saying, go out and buy it. And you could picture all these people leaping off of their couches, grabbing their wallets and flying down the street to buy it. Whereas if you tell anyone in England to say, buy it now, the English will say, fuck off. So I began to think that the English needed the Americans and vice versa, because we needed your positiveness and your openness, and you needed our skepticism, right? Because Americans are more easily fooled than the English. The English tend to say, oh yeah, pull the other one, it's got bells on it, you know? Whereas Americans say, yeah, that's it, I've never thought of that before.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here.
Lovely to be here.
Next question.
You've made me laugh for 50 years.
Thank you. And you've given me all the halibut I'll ever be able to eat. He's from Alaska.
I've always been fascinated with the Fliegenden Zirkus, the German episodes you did.
Yeah.
As a German teacher, I was curious. What went into deciding to make those, and if there's any backlash?
Well, it was a very good question. We made the first series, and you see, because it was a very original program, the critics didn't get it. You'd think the critics would have been out front saying this is new, and they didn't understand it, because critics are not creative themselves. And they'll almost always miss anything that's really creative, like Waiting for Godot. When that came out, sorry, Godot. Waiting for Godot, when that came out, the critics in Britain didn't like it. They don't always miss things that are genuine. You know, we've not had any kind of very positive feedback. A few people had loved Python. Then, after the second series, a lovely German called Alfred Bielek, Dr. Alfred Bielek, he called us up and he said, I love your Monty Python. I want very much people in Germany to be able to enjoy it. Will you come to Germany, to Munich, and make a program in the German language? And we said, that's fantastic. What a challenge, what fun. And we said, how does it work? And he said, well, you come to Munich for 2-3 days, and you look at all the locations here, and then you go back, you write the show in English, and then we translate it into German, and you learn it power fashion, and then we shoot it. Oh, we said, all right. That sounds like fun. And, I can tell you a very naughty story. Am I allowed to tell you one really bad taste story? You think you've heard bad taste? Not yet. We went to Munich. We actually went to Munich, and we flew there. And they were going to show us all the possible locations. It was the beginning of the whole enterprise, and we arrived in Germany, got off the plane, and they'd hired one of those wonderful German bands, playing the Python theme as we got off the film. Are you recording this? Don't. You'll soon see why. Then we got off the plane, and they beautiful cars took us to the hotel, and then Alfred said, now please, will you go to the hotel and go up to your hotel rooms and have a quick wash up? Because in 25 minutes we go to Dachau. What did he say? He said, we're going to see Dachau. Why are we going to Dachau? No. So we said, oh, all right, because you don't argue with your hosts, you see. So we came, we went on Brussels, and we came down to the cars and we drove to Dachau. We didn't like to say, where the fuck are we going there, you know. So we got to Dachau. There was a bit of an argument going on, and we couldn't figure out what the problem was, but Alfred was over there arguing with people at a kiosk, and he came back and he said, I'm so sorry, we have made a stupid mistake. German efficiency, I don't think. I'm afraid Dachau is early closing here today, so we have to come back tomorrow, we can't go in now. And Graham Chapman shouted out, tell them we're Jews. Graham Chapman, who was the naughtiest man on the planet. Terrible. But we did make the show, we made it in German, and I learned useful phrases. I can still say, ich kann mit einem Eile für Fledermäuse töten, which means I can kill bats with an egg spoon. Always comes in useful, Actually, I was at a police function once in London, and a young English copper came up to me with his girlfriend, and he said, Mr. Cleese, may I introduce my German girlfriend? She's called Heidi, and she doesn't speak any English. Can you say something to her in German? So I turned to Heidi and I said, ich kann mit einem Eile für Fledermäuse töten. And Heidi said, wirklich? Does that answer your question?
Everybody, can you please give me a huge round of applause?